My wife has to pay. We're back in the waiting room at the marriage therapist's office. We see her once a week, and this is our 12th visit. The therapist doesn't know it yet, but this is also our last visit. I have a surprise for both my wife and our therapist. In the future, they can get together without me to figure out where they went wrong. My wife can pay. You've heard stories about therapists like this one, but I never thought I'd be dealing with one. I call her the charlatan. She's a man, she's a hateful fool. It's no harder than it looks. She lives to make excuses for women and their bad behavior. Despite my objections, my wife chose her. We could have chosen a legitimate therapist together. We could have talked with them, developed mutual trust in the one we chose, and moved forward to do the hard work together. But that didn't happen. Ruth needed to stack the deck so she could control the appointments. She wanted to be in control of the appointments. I'm not saying I disagree with therapy, but I don't think it's the answer. My wife's complaints always come back to me with the words, "David, you need to realize that you have not been providing for your wife well. At least that ends today." I suppose it's worth looking at what brought us to this point. We got married right out of college 25 years ago. We have 2 children, a boy and a girl, and they're both in college. They're great kids, but I don't know how to be the best father I can be. My wife was often away, so my kids jokingly called me Palm in the papa-mom sense when I tried to fill the void the first time. I was a bit offended at first, but I quickly realized that they could see that I was both mother and father to them. I made their school lunches, helped with homework, took them to little leagues and soccer games, met with their teachers, and so on. My wife's contribution seemed to consist of complaining about how important her low-paying job was and being too tired to do anything. Her job was to complain about me and say she was too tired to do anything. She did contribute, but over the years she seemed to be less and less involved with the family and more preoccupied with life outside the home. Her complaints about work were replaced by complaints about me. I never did that. She was always complaining that we didn't have enough money, or that we didn't take the best vacations, or whatever else her frustration made her focus on. I saw this, and as they got older I started hearing it a lot. "Daddy, you're the best." It made it all worth it. You know the old "how do you boil a frog" story? I was anyway. That frog finally got fed up and I jumped out of the pot. I spent most of my adult life trying to figure out what was wrong with my wife. She grew up in a dysfunctional family. You could read about it in horror stories if horror stories were about parents who stalked their children. Her mother, she was a serial adulterer who used her daughter to cover up her infidelities. As a child, she was taught never to tell her father what really happened during these shopping trips. Her father wasn't stupid, but he was a weak and broken man. He was a mouse that growled so painfully. He was also very shy. He'd stop by for a drink after work. When he got home, he'd raise hell. The house became a battleground where there was no real communication, no time together, and no joy. As a child, my wife would see the evening approaching, gather something to eat, and stay in her bedroom to avoid hostilities in the rest of the house. It's no surprise that she became the way she did. Deception and manipulation were her lot. It took me decades to realize that she was deeply broken and could never truly live in a marriage. That realization softened the pain, and my love for my children kept me going until they were grown. I did see a therapist for a while. I explained to her the picture I had seen and told her about Ruth's childhood. I kept asking what I could do to fix the slow destruction of my marriage. She patiently explained to me that she could only help whoever was in front of her, and that was me. She taught me to take care of myself and to stand up for myself. I saw a therapist for a while. I told her about the picture I'd seen, told her about Ruth's childhood, and kept asking what I could do to fix the slow destruction of my marriage. She was really patient and explained that she could only help whoever was in front of her, and that was me. She taught me to take care of myself and to stand up for myself. I had to learn to stand up for myself and not let Ruth drag me down into an empty life. I focused on my children and made sure to live for them. I kept the door open in case Ruth ever decided to enter the family. Now that the kids were in college, I realized the end was near. I couldn't go on like this. I was pretty sure that Ruth would end up destroying our marriage. My therapist explained that when a child grows up in chaos, they adapt to it. I know it sounds crazy, but she said that when things were good in her life, Ruth would blow things up because chaos was what she was most comfortable with. That was a realization for me. I thought, I'm not crazy after all. I saw the pattern, but I didn't believe it. Now that the kids were off to college, Our finances were under control. The house was almost paid off, and the two of us had enough free time to enjoy time together. She was destined to ruin everything. My thoughts on the matter were. We were interrupted when the door to the inner office opened, and another couple entered the waiting room. The husband looked tearful, and the wife looked smug. By then, I knew how to proceed. We would wait for the charlatan to write her notes on the last session, and then the door opened, and Ruth said, "I'm ready to meet with you and David." It was her way of saying she'd forgiven me, so I could bring in the next victim. Ruth sat on the couch, and the charlatan always expected me to sit next to her. But this time I chose the chair to Ruth's right with my back to the door. "David, please sit with your wife. I'm sorry, but I can see her better from here. Besides, my back hurts, and this couch has never been comfortable for me." God, that was an understatement. The charlatan looks annoyed and says, "David, is there anything you want to say after our last meeting?" "Yes, I do. We keep coming here, supposedly working on our... I still can't get over the idea that my wife is cheating on me. Nothing that has been said here will change my mind." The charlatan didn't even wait for my wife to speak. "David, I've already told you that I am absolutely certain that Ruth is not cheating on you. She and I have talked about it. I'm convinced it's all in your mind. You need to drop it and move on." She doesn't even wait for my answer. "Ruth, what do you want to talk about today?" Ruth didn't hide her bias, did she? Ruth went through a mental list of my shortcomings and stopped at, "He doesn't support me." That was all it took, and she was off. "To the races, he complains when I work late, and I just want to go out with my friends sometimes to unwind," and so on. Ruth was complaining, and Charlton was nodding her head. It was just like every session. I knew Ruth would go on for a long time, so I let my thoughts wander early on in our therapy. I'm not sure. In one session, I told my therapist that I thought my wife had been unfaithful in the past. I didn't have any proof. It was just a feeling. The therapist dismissed my thoughts and told me it was all in my head. 2 months later, my doubts turned into certainties, and the therapist's opinion went down the drain. To prepare for war, the preparations took some time. David, are you listening?" "Oh yeah, I heard. I don't support her. Ruth said you ignore her and her needs. You don't support her when she needs to work late, and you're jealous when she wants to spend a few hours with friends. Well, I keep coming back to the feeling I have that she is not faithful." Now, the charlatan couldn't even hide her contempt. "David, get over it and be a man. I told you she's not cheating on you. Your wife needs a man who can take care of himself, but if you keep acting like this, maybe she should find someone else." The charlatan only shook her head in disgust. "Ruth, you said he doesn't take care of the house like he used to mow the lawn when he was supposed to. The house needs a new coat of paint, and so on." I thought I could name this tune from 3 notes, but I guess I gave away my thoughts. That was careless of me. "David, what are you grinning about? This is serious work. I'm sorry." With that, my apologies were pretty insincere. My thoughts began to wander again. I wandered off again as my wife spoke. "Ruth always insists on driving her car to our meetings with the charlatan. I'm at work, but I could easily pick her up and we'd drive together. That's not going to work, though. Also, for some reason, she's never free in the afternoon after our meetings." I put it off, but eventually I got around to hiring a private investigator. I got an investigator to follow her, starting the afternoon after our meetings. As it turned out, after each session, she was meeting Bill Peterson at the Best Western Hotel off the highway. I expanded the coverage, and now it was every Thursday, but only on Thursday. Why weren't they running off every chance they got? It soon became obvious that this was not a new affair. It had been going on for a while when I realized that she was keeping him at a distance. Even with her adulterous boyfriend, she couldn't risk letting him get too close. They had a permanent room, which made it easy for my private investigator to sneak a camera and recorder into the room. After seeing this, my wife started therapy. I just had to wait for the right moment to act. I now had 3 opponents to beat my wife, Bill, and the charlatan. When I was ready, I visited Bill's wife and gave her copies of all the documents she used. She wasn't in great health, which made me a bit nervous, but the lawyer said she'd be fine. Despite her physical problems, she would be able to get him out, which sounded like the revenge I was looking for. David, are you listening?" "Oh yeah, I heard the house needs a new paint job." Well, that's when there was a knock on the door. "Who the hell is it?" The charlatan stood up. "I'll get it anyway. It's for me. It's a seance. This is sacred time." "What do you mean?" I didn't give her a chance to finish. I opened the door and there stood Bill and his wife Marie. Welcome, I said. "Perfect timing. I'm glad you could make it." Bill looked confused, but Marie looked like a determined woman. Her hand shook a little as she placed her cane on each step, but she strode purposefully into the room. Bill clearly didn't know who I was. He held out his hand. My wife made this appointment. I honestly don't know why we're here. Well, let me explain. Bill turned to my right and pointed to my wife, sitting on the couch. I said, "You know my wife, Ruth, don't you, Bill? I've heard of it, but I've never seen it." The color disappeared from his face, and he turned pale white. "I don't know," he said. "Don't lie, this is a safe space for us all." I stole that phrase from my first session with the therapist. Coincidentally, that's when she decided to speak up. "David, what is going on here? How can you interrupt a session like this?" "I'm sorry, M. Jacobs. This is Bill Peterson. He's been having an affair with my wife for almost a year. Before you say it's all in my imagination, I've got loads of photos and videos of them having sex at the Best Western." I turned to Bill and said, "Bill, why don't you sit next to Ruth? If you can sleep with her, you can at least sit next to her while we deal with this unpleasant business." Then I kissed Marie on the cheek and said, "It's always good to see you, Marie. Would you like this chair? It's surprisingly comfortable." She sat down and stared at her husband, smiling. I sat down in the chair across from her, so that the coffee table was between us, Ruth and Bill on my right, Charlatan on my left. They were still making guppy fish faces, mouth opening and closing but making no sound. "Well, isn't this wonderful?" Marie said. "You look beautiful as always. How are you feeling today?" "Better than usual," David replied. "Thanks for asking. I'm about to feel a weight lifted off my shoulders." I smiled at that remark. Marie was a woman with real problems and a difficult future. Her optimism and cheerfulness were inspiring. Miss Jacobs had told me earlier that all my thoughts about Ruth cheating on me were in my head. Marie laughed. I looked around the room. "Who wants to see the pictures?" I grabbed my tablet. "If anyone wants to, I'll show them." I suggested we watch one of the movies, and Charlotte Tonka was on. I asked Marie if she wanted to see it. She said she didn't think it was a real novel. I told her I'd told her it didn't exist. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she turned to Bill and said, "You know, Bill, sleeping with my wife is one thing, but I've been her husband for a long time, and despite her lies and betrayal, I still have a sense of responsibility for her well-being. Maybe you've never just made love to her, or maybe that's not what she's into right now." I looked at Ruth. "If I'd known you wanted to be treated like this, you wouldn't have slept with that slippery coward behind my back." I never would have thought it, but she was really sobbing to me. It was incomprehensible. Obviously, she knew our marriage was over. Bill's marriage was over. Now she could be with Bill all she wanted and with any other man. Why the tears? She was losing me, and she made it clear in every way she could that she didn't need me in the first place, except maybe to provide the emotional stability she couldn't provide on her own. Ruth finally found her voice. "I never meant for you to find out. I'm sorry, David. I never meant to hurt you." And so on, moving down the list of cheating cliches. It was so pathetic, it was almost funny. "Stop pouring. Ruth, you've had time to think about your actions." Looking at the pathetic man sitting next to her, I asked, "What's your excuse? Your wife gave you 2 children who are now grown and living on their own. She has special needs, and you repay her by sneaking around. Have you ever thought about being a man, fulfilling your responsibilities and being honest with someone for once in your life?" I could see the anger rising on his face. I was more than happy to help out if I'd had the chance, but I didn't. The two of them sat there, making excuses and offering apologies, until there was another knock on the door. I looked at Marie. Our last guest had arrived, and the charlatan had been surprisingly quiet. This caused her to have another outburst, and I just shrugged and opened the door. An older man in a cheap suit came into the office, so I pointed him to the couch. He walked over to the 2 crooks, handed them each an envelope, and said, "Ruth Harper, Bill Peterson, you have been served." Then he took a picture and left. That was the end of it. I guess it was his first time serving someone in that way. I was in a marriage counselor's office, because as he walked by, he gave me a sly smile and quietly left the room. I closed the door behind him and returned to my seat. It's been quite a day, hasn't it? I could tell by the clock on the wall that our hour was running out. Perhaps M. Jacobs could spend the last few minutes with the cheaters too. I thought I'd help them figure out what happened today. I turned to her and added, with a fair amount of sarcasm in my voice, "Maybe you can figure out how you could have gotten everything so horribly mixed up." I stood up, helped Marie to her feet, and took her hand as we left the office, walking slowly down the hall. I asked, "Are you? I think you'll be okay." When you first showed me the evidence of their betrayal, I was confused. I thought, how could the man I married do this to me? Now I know he's not the man I married, and he's not the man I thought I married. All I'm losing are memories, or the illusion of what I thought I had, but I didn't have it. I felt like she was speaking for both of us. She looked at me. I still have children, and in a few years there will be grandchildren. I'll be fine. You also have friends. Don't forget that. Maybe in time you can count me among them. She smiled a sad smile and patted my hand. I already do. What do you say to having lunch with? I had a friend with me, and she smiled for the first time all day. I'd love to, she said. So we went to lunch in our cars. It was a melancholy meal, as we each silently recalled the sad events of the day. We'd known this was going to happen, and we'd planned it together. But it was the end of 2 marriages and the life we'd built and thought. We talked about the 2 of them for a while, and eventually decided it was time to move on. We chatted about our kids and everything that was going on in our town. We even discovered that we had a few friends in common, and that they would be supportive of both of us. You know that when this is all over, I knew that friends were going to try to set us up on blind dates with all of their single friends. At that thought, I involuntarily flinched. She laughed softly and said it won't be that bad. Who knows, you might even like it. All I could do was shake my head and sigh as we talked. I became more and more optimistic about our future eventually. I made my way home, not caring where the cheaters had gone, individually or together, or how they got there. Perhaps they left together to plan a mutual defense or find lawyers, or maybe they just went to their weekly meeting. More likely, she'd given him a ride since Marie had their car. Of course, it was never that simple. When Ruth got home later, she thought about every possible apology she could come up with. She even threw in a few rebukes because we all know that when a woman cheats, it's at least partly her husband's fault. I wondered if the charlatan was still counseling her when she finally ran out of breath and sat sobbing. I decided it was my turn. I spoke briefly and matter-of-factly. Throughout our marriage, I felt sorry for you. I knew your childhood home was tough, but I thought you were mostly unharmed. I thought that if I provided you with a truly loving marriage, you could heal and become the woman I knew you could be. I wanted to be. What I didn't realize is that you are incapable of healing. You are deeply broken. For every progress we've made and every fortunate circumstance, you've ruined everything. You are incapable of being happy. All you know is sadness and destruction. I can't live like this anymore. I don't want to live with a liar. Ruth, I've decided that we need to go our separate ways. The children are grown up now, so it's time for us to move on. I thought for a moment before I finished what I was going to say. You need help, Ruth. You need real therapy, not this charlatan who tries to validate everything you say and justify everything you do. If you find a therapist like that, you need to let them control the sessions. I know you, and you need to be in control. You're not going to get where you need to go if you control the journey. You need a real professional to guide you through the process of introspection so you can get rid of the ghosts and demons that have haunted you since your youth. You've needed help since you were young. I really hope you'll get the help you need. I don't think she heard me. There were too many obstacles in her brain preventing her from accepting my advice. The sad truth is that she was too much of a coward to face her demons. I have to admit that the decision to divorce Ruth was really difficult for me. I kept going back to my vow and remembering that, no matter what, I knew Ruth wasn't well. I decided that sick or not, Ruth could still tell right from wrong, and that betrayal was still betrayal. 3 years have passed since that meeting with the therapist, and I've moved on with my life. The divorce was finalized a little over 2 years ago, and we split our lives in half. I was ordered to pay alimony for 3 years, with less than a year to go. What I've learned from all this is that when love dies and anger subsides, what remains is a deep sense of sadness and loss. I lost what I had, but I lost it long before the divorce. I also lost what I could have had if I'd ever had it to begin with. But you can't go through life focusing on what you've lost. I moved across town, kept the friends who, over time, became the best therapy for me, and rebuilt my life with a renewed focus on what I'd always enjoyed and had given up too often because my wife wanted different things. Along the way, I met a wonderful woman who shares my interests. We've both been burned before and are in no hurry. I'm optimistic, but I'm in no hurry. As for Bill, he got a pass. I wasn't about to go to jail just for a little revenge. Moreover, Marie needed him to make a living so he could pay for her upkeep. I guess he got what he deserved. I guess the whole sad experience taught me an important lesson. I realized that we can build a good or even better life if we remember who we are look forward and make the most of what life offers us. As for my ex, I doubt she will ever be happy. It's just not in her character to appreciate the good things in life. She will always be looking for something more than what she has, losing what is most important, all the while refusing to put a piece of herself into the lives of those around her. I feel sad for her, but I know now that I can't change who or what she is, and all I can do is move forward.